The following program discusses sensitive issues related to sexuality. Parents are cautioned this presentation may be too candid for younger audiences.
Welcome to Intimate Clarity. I'm Jason Bradley, and I'm here with Jennifer Jill Schwarzer, and she is a licensed professional counselor, and today we're going to be discussing a very sensitive topic, but it's a conversation we need to have. Jen, what is sexual abuse, and how does it affect a person?
That is a very sensitive topic, and it's one that affects many, many people. Sexual abuse is whenever someone who is in any way stronger than another and capable of dominating that other dominates them for the purpose of their own sexual pleasure. And so it can occur in a lot of different contexts at any stage, any age. Of course, the most heart-wrenching version of it is the abuse of children. So let me give you some statistics here. Globally, 7.9% of men and 19.7% of women are abused sexually before the age of 18. That's 8%, nearly 8% of men, close to 10%, and almost 20% of women.
Wow, so double.
Abused before the age of 18. Now, there's a couple of qualifiers here. One is that a lot of abuse is not reported. It's vastly underreported. And if you think about it, the very systems, families, and societies where this kind of thing is condoned or ignored are the very kind that would not want it to come out. And so they would have an incentive to hide it. So there's a lot of underreporting of abuse. And in addition to that, this is only before the age of 18, not including the abuse that occurs afterward, and it can continue to happen even after the age of 18. The only kind of abuse is not child abuse. It's a very broad thing. So it's quite a heart-wrenching problem, and it's a very, very prevalent problem.
And it's one, you know, it's probably underreported too, because sometimes these people are probably feeling shame. You know, sometimes the victims feel ashamed, and sometimes they might feel like they brought it on themselves, which is, what is that called when, is there a name for that?
Survivor shame, survivor's guilt, victim shaming. A lot of times the system they're a part of shames them when they try to report it. Oftentimes they come with an allegation, say for instance they experience abuse within the family, they try to tell another family member, and they're shamed by the family because the family is incentivized not to believe the worst about, for instance, the alpha male of the tribe, so to speak. So the child will experience secondary disturbance when they try to report it. And they'll walk away with a lot of imposed shame, is what I would call it.
Wow.
And then they'll internalize that shame. It'll become internalized shame, and they'll then carry it with them into their adult life. It's a tragic thing.
That's like a lifelong impact, pretty much.
It can really, really impact a person. And it always amazes me as a counselor, the severity of the impact of sexual abuse. You know, I counsel a lot of victims, and sometimes I just say to myself, are there any, particularly women, that haven't experienced any abuse?
Yeah.
Well, one of the most often cited statistics is that 1/3, 1 out of every 3 women is either sexually abused, raped, or perpetrated, violence is perpetrated on them. So abuse
One
is
out of 3
1 out of every
women?
3 globally. It's very, very common. Women suffer a lot of abuse of various kinds. And so, you know, people will suffer as a result of these things, and I'm amazed at how many victims there are. And often I'm the first one to hear about it as a counselor, because oftentimes they've come from families that shame the victim, and I end up being the one that's hearing about it for the first time. And I consider that a privilege, really, because that individual can then just tell their story to someone who actually believes them.
Yes.
But I'm also amazed at the severity of the effect of that. Even if the abuse itself was not severe, even if it happened in only an isolated number of cases, it wasn't, you know, constant, it didn't continue over years, even if it's just a few isolated incidents, it'll still have a profound impact And one of the things I do as a counselor is I accept that, and I don't shame the victim for having such a severe impact or such severe consequences as a result of the abuse.
So they feel comfortable in coming to you and talking to you about it because you're
do.
not shaming them, you're listening to them.
They do.
As they address the issue.
They
Yeah.
do. And that's one of the difficult things about being a counselor is you believe the person that's coming to you, because in most cases they don't have an incentive to lie. And typically when a victim comes to you, they don't have an incentive to lie. They're actually paying you for counseling sessions.
Yes.
And they need to get something done. They need to get through something. And so they're very incentivized to work through it. And the chances of them lying are very, very small, very, very small. However, sometimes in counseling, you're dealing with a marriage situation where there is an incentive to lie. But typically, I'll say this, typically with victims of sexual abuse, when they come to me reporting something that happened to them previously, they don't have an agenda against anyone. They're just trying to deal with the effects of what they went through. So what I do is I believe the victim.
Okay.
Even if I don't have concrete proof except their testimony, I believe them. Because in the vast majority of cases, the victim is telling the truth. The alleged victim is telling the truth in sexual abuse cases. I also work with dealing with abuse cases in the church. I work with various ministries that help to deal with this problem in the church. And we have kind of a rule of thumb that the victim is most likely telling the truth. And so we should believe the victim, but at the same time still ask for evidence and still seek evidence, because there are cases where they do lie.
Absolutely. I mean, you do have those cases, like you said, where there's false allegations and you're tarnishing someone's
Reputation
name
and really
reputation
ruining their
and
life.
everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
It does happen, but when someone alleges being sexually abused by someone falsely, there's a couple of things going on that are actually very rare. One of them is abnormal psychology. Most women, and I'll just use women as an example because it can happen to either males or females, but most, and I would say this is true of males more so, don't want to be the one that got abused. Like, that's not flattering, or that doesn't make me feel good about myself at all. It's not something I want to be known for. And so the fact that they're coming forward with this thing is probably not a form of attention seeking. But there is an abnormal psychology that does seek attention, even if it's negative attention. So that can be happening. There can also be a vendetta, a history with that person where you want to level a playing field or settle a score, and so you try to take down that person. So those are the cases in which sometimes there are false allegations, but they are few and far between. Most typically when a victim comes forth, they're telling the truth.
yeah, it's like, why would you want to lie about that?
And I would rather believe them and be fooled than disbelieve them and take the risk of re-traumatizing them. So I just go ahead and, as a general rule, I believe the victim, but I won't necessarily go forth, writing letters against a perpetrator or anything like that until I have evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
So that's how I roll. But I believe people because they need to be believed if they were truly abused. And a lot of times, it's amazing, just telling someone your story can in and of itself be powerfully therapeutic. And just listening to that victim and just hearing what they've been through and empathizing with them can provide the basis, the beginning anyway, of their recovery from it. So,
What do you think that is?
well, I think that's a very good question. I think that human beings are tremendous archivists. Look at our history. Look at our history books. Look at the whole study of history and how we've kept track of our history down to the minutia sometimes. I think every human being has a drive to archive their history. Now, what happens when your history entails trauma that you haven't shared with anyone else is you carry that with you. And a lot of times when you share that history with another person, you can then, in a sense, distance yourself from it because you know where you can find it, particularly if that person writes it down. And I do that when I'm listening to people. I take notes. And I write it down so they know it's been recorded somewhere. I can find it if I need to, but for now I can let go of it.
And it shows you're paying very close attention to their
And I
story.
care about what they're saying. It matters to me. That's right. So a lot of times these sexual abuse scenarios will produce very severe symptoms in people, and they'll struggle with anxiety disorders. They'll struggle with depression. They'll have post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of it, and other mental health issues are much more prevalent in the population of people that have been through abuse.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so how do they work through those?
Well, let me talk about PTSD.
Okay.
PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. It really shouldn't be called a disorder because a lot of times they're just responding to something that was devastating. And so they're having kind of a normal response to something devastating. And some people feel like calling it a disorder really stigmatizes the person that suffered this devastating situation. So what it basically is we think that normally when memories process, the person is able to remove the charge from that memory, the emotional charge, and file the facts about that memory in their mind. But in PTSD, for some reason, that process goes awry, and the person keeps re-experiencing that memory. They're not able to remove the charge and file it. So it's thought that the mind is trying to bring that memory forward because the person hasn't thoroughly processed it.
So
And
they're basically reliving that experience over and over and over again.
That's right, and it's thought that it's the mind's attempt to get the memory processed effectively. And so that's why when we talk through these traumatic events in that person's life, a lot of times that enables them to process that memory sufficiently to where they can store the memory and the facts about it without reliving it. And it's amazing, people that have suffered through and gone through sexual abuse will be able to share their story, and they will often go forward and share their story for the benefit of other people. And they can just deadpan, be telling a story of what they went through. I'm one of them. I was attacked by a group of young people on the playground as I think it was 12, 13 years old, and a group of girls attacked me and physically and sexually abused me in front of the whole class back on a baseball diamond away from the eyes of teachers and staff of the school. And that was a horrible trauma to go through, but I share that. I just shared it with you. I didn't even feel a flicker of emotion because I've processed it. And I've, in fact, gotten to the place where I'm actually grateful that it happened because it gives me credibility with other victims. I know how they feel, and I can tell them I went through that, and it'll give me a little change in the bank, and they'll feel more confident with me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They'll be able to identify
That's right.
with you. Yes.
And that's thorough memory processing, and that's possible for anybody out there that's dealing with post-traumatic stress as a result of sexual abuse. You can get through this. Find a good counselor, a good biblical counselor. AbideCounseling.com is a good place to go if you're seeking biblical counseling, and that's at least a good place to start.
And you said it's Abide Counseling?
AbideCounseling.com. It's a network, a counseling network that I manage. Start out with a good counselor and work through some of those memories, and you can get through it. You get out the other end. It's possible. We'll always be scarred from these things, but we won't always be sustaining open, gaping wounds. We want to bind the wound. We'll always have the scar, but we'll be able to speak through that scar, just like Jesus speaks through his scars to us of all that he went through to save humanity. So it doesn't have to end here. It gets better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to say that to people that struggle.
And, one of the things that I found when we're talking about freeing, like when someone shares their testimony and they're, like you said, they're replaying it, but they see how Christ has given them the victory or how Christ has delivered them from a situation, that has a positive impact on that person. And is that kind of what you're saying as well?
Yeah, and when you bring the God factor into a sexual abuse situation, it turns everything around because, Jesus said, the person that offends a little one, and that applies to anyone weaker than anyone else, it's not just children. He says they deserve capital punishment. And sometimes that's all a victim needs to hear is that God is outraged by what happened to them.
Wow.
There's so much more we can say.
Our time is up. But again, I can't wait to talk about our next subject.
Amen.
Make sure you tune in next time to Intimate Clarity. God bless.